Hello, this is Galen Studler. I'm the author of This Mad Masquerade, Stardom and Masculinity in the Jazz Age, and co-editor of Visions of the East, Orientalism in Film. I invite you to join me in watching The Sheik from 1921, starring Rudolph Valentino. I hope my commentary will help you appreciate this film, one of the most financially successful and socially influential American feature films of its time. After this fragment from an unknown poem, we are shown the opening call to prayer of the Muslim muezzin. Note the painted backdrop. And then a high-angle shot of a group of the faithful against the desert sands. An intertitle and shots of an oasis follow. All of this sets the stage for the Sheik to be an Orientalist tale. Let me explain what I mean by this. The late Edward Said defined Orientalist texts as ones in which the West represents the Middle East through a repertoire of largely demeaning stereotypes, representations that define it as the object of Westerners' fascination and fear. The result of this imaginative construction of the Orient, he argued, is that whether in literature, music, painting, political discourse, photography, or film, Orientalism is always engaged in solidifying the hierarchy of the West over the East in a process that naturalizes these images and narratives as truth through endless repetition. Now this scene gets down to brass tacks, what the Sheik is really obsessed with, Oriental sexuality. The Middle East is associated with the exchange of women who are defined culturally as chattel, as property, and yet another register of Eastern primitivism. But since the film is in the genre of the desert romance, this early scene establishes that male-female sexual relations based on love rather than just property rights are valued by its darkly handsome hero, Ahmed Ben Hassan, portrayed by Rudolph Valentino. The attitude of the Sheik towards Yusuf and Zila reassures the audience that this hero is not only exotically attractive, but that he can be transformed from a lascivious kidnapper into a tender lover and husband material. Indeed, anyone who had been paying attention at all to popular culture in the United Kingdom and the United States would have known the basic plot of E.M. Hull's notorious novel, The Sheik, on which the film was based. In it, Ahmed Ben Hassan kidnaps an aristocratic British woman. The Sheik was a book written by a woman for women, who not only made Hull's Orientalist tale a bestseller, but were also credited with or blamed for making the film a box office smash hit, one that cemented Valentino's stardom and made him a cultural symbol who raised all sorts of disturbing questions about women's relationship to movie stars, to gender norms, as well as to sexual pleasure and racial boundaries. The film shifts locations to the caravan's destination, the Algerian city of Biskra, nicknamed by the French the Nice of Algeria. Here, the film will take up the Oriental captivity narrative in which the white woman is abducted by a so-called black man. Who will be kidnapped, of course? The foolish madcap Lady Diana Mayo, who is introduced by these gossiping ladies. Finally, we see Lady Diana in the flesh, embodied by Agnes Ayres. One reviewer thought her rather too matronly for this role, and I think this assessment is spot on. And another thought she was too limited as an actress. Lady Diana's brother Aubrey looks villainous here, but he's merely a stick in the mud. Aubrey is played by Frank Butler, who soon abandoned acting to become an extremely successful screenwriter. It is noteworthy that Butler drew on Orientalist tropes and satirized them in his screenplay for the Bob Hope Bing Crosby comedy of 1942, Road to Morocco. He wrote two other Hope Crosby road movies and co-wrote the Academy Award-winning screenplay for Crosby's Going My Way of 1944. In this nighttime garden scene, based on a scene from the book version of the Sheik, Lady Diana's attitudes reflect the perception that women, especially young women, were seeking freedom in the post-World War I period, including their freedom from middle-class male domestic authority. And contrary to the book, Lady Diana is not masculinized in appearance. In the book, she has shingled hair and is so masculine in her clothing and habits that the mothers of marriageable young women do not regard her as a rival to their daughters for eligible young men. She is so peculiar. We also see here how the film's organization will depend heavily on cross-cutting, intercutting Diana's rejection of her suitor with the arrival of the Sheik's caravan, to create a picturesque night spectacle. Now we're going to have the hero and heroine in the same public social space, with the Sheik treated by the camera and the crowd like a celebrity. He and Diana are soon locked in a battle of looking, of the gaze. And Diana loses. Their exchange of looks inscribes the sexual attraction that presumably motivates the Sheik's kidnapping of Diana, unlike the book. The scene also establishes the complex cultural credentials of the Sheik and the fact that his authority is not even bound by that of the French colonial rulers. This is in keeping with Orientalism's long association in the Middle East with despotic rulers, who are beyond any law but their own desires. I love the Gallic shrug of the French official here in reaction to Diana. Diana's smug racial superiority, perhaps along with sexual curiosity, now leads her into a dangerous violation of social norms. This scene in the casino is a complete fabrication of Muslim practice, since gambling is forbidden in the Quran. Inserted by screenwriter Monty Catterjohn, however, it is useful on two levels. First, giving the audience a forbidden glimpse into the exchange of women as chattel, and second, anteing up the sexual tension between Sheik Ahmed bin Hassan and Lady Diana. Dressing and undressing scenes of Valentino will be inserted into many of his films as he becomes an erotic object enhanced by soft-focus photography and flattering camera angles, lighting, as well as through costuming, or the lack of it. His second wife, Natasha Rambova, claimed that he looked best in the nude. And he almost is in some scenes of The Young Raja, made in 1922, a film she designed his costumings for. Eroticizing Valentino in ways more often associated with female stars happened because Valentino was thought to appeal almost exclusively to women, at least in the United States. And we need to understand, too, that during this time period, the American film industry thought women constituted its most important audience. If not the majority of movie patrons, then at least they were the group believed to largely determine a film's box office success or failure. This scene also demonstrates another pattern that will be repeated throughout the film. That is, interior scenes in views that take advantage of deep space and somewhat intricate set design. Art design for this film has been credited to Rudolph, but some sources give credit for set design to Brian Peterson, who worked on 3 other Valentino films: Stolen Moments from 1920, The Young Raja, which I have mentioned, and the film immediately following this one, Moran of the Lady Letty. Many shots are framed by arches, curtains, doorways, and/or human figures, like the guards. This enhances the sense that we are participating in a voyeuristic look at the most intimate secrets of the East. Now we have Diana in Oriental garb. Orientalized fashions were very popular with women in the US and Europe in the teens and 20s, inspired by French designer Paul Poiret and the costumes of Léon Bast, created for the Ballet Russe, especially for Diaghilev's dance productions of Scheherazade and Cleopatra. Everyone's getting excited. But Diane is now in danger, on the verge of becoming the white slave, the most sought-after prize of lustful Arabs, Turks, Moors, and so forth in Orientalist texts for hundreds of years. Such an image of the white woman, either being sold into slavery or living in a harem, was inscribed relentlessly in Orientalist paintings in the 18th and 19th century. Diana's Oriental masquerade allowed her entry into an exciting adventure and forbidden territory until the attendant's selection of her as a bride. And now the Sheik's interest turns into unveiling her whiteness. What can Diana do but whip out her little gun? The Sheik's amused, and probably you will be too. As critics have pointed out, this is a campy moment in a film filled with excess, but Diana's melodramatic reaction is nicely complicated by Valentino's physical grace that turns the scene into something sexy as well as silly. The Sheik's cool masculine disdain and graceful civility trump her cultural presumption and racial disdain. Notice his graceful handling of Diana's shawl. This scene is among many in the film that take advantage of Valentino's dance background. Soon after 18-year-old Rudolfo Guglielmi immigrated to the U.S. in 1913, he made his living as a tango tea or taxi dancer, dancing with ladies at Maxime's restaurant and cabaret in New York City. This was before he became a professional dance exhibition partner to Bonnie Glass. His experience in being gallant and pleasing to women is registered in his dance-like movement, his graceful control of his body. Rex Ingram, who directed Valentino in The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, praised the actor as having poise and repose. That is, the physical virtues of a dancer that Ingram believed would translate into an effective screen presence. For after all, let's not forget, we are dealing with moving pictures. Sometimes the Sheik is treated as if it were Valentino's first successful starring role, but The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, released a few months earlier from rival studio Metro Pictures, accomplished that for the actor. As Julio, an Argentinian playboy, he danced a sexy tango in the film, and his acting was praised as natural. But Valentino became unhappy with his pay, and he moved to famous players Lasky in a one-picture studio option deal. The Sheik is both cheaper and technically inferior filmmaking compared to The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Its direction by George Melford and cinematography by William Marshall are old-fashioned, as at least one reviewer noted. The acting, including Valentino's, is often over the top, melodramatic, and even cartoonish. Valentino was not initially credited or publicized as the star of the Sheik, but his star power, combined with the infamy of the source material, made this film monstrously successful. And that success made Valentino not just a top-tier movie star, but a cultural icon, the great lover, a worldwide phenomenon, not just a star in the U.S. The Middle East of Orientalism is nothing if not picturesque, drawing the eye, offering visual pleasure. Sometimes that pleasure can be in an intimate location like this scene, but can also be based on awesome landscape and beautiful views. At the other extreme, it can come from the overwhelming, the grotesque, and the off-putting. This inherent dichotomy in the picturesque is very evident in Orientalist visual texts, including the Sheik. Mustafa Ali is played by Charles Brindley, a supporting actor born in Yuma, Arizona. In his over 25 years in Hollywood, he appeared in at least 140 films, many of which were westerns. In exterior scenes, director Melford and cinematographer Marshall rely mainly on long shots and on close-ups framed as Ayres shots, as if we are observing the action through a spyglass or monocular. This creates the feeling of participating in a distantiated view, a kind of tourist gaze that allows observation at a safe distance. The Sheik affords its audience sweeping, picturesque views of the desert, often with caravans or Arab men on horses moving through the expanses. Arabs on horseback was a favorite subject of paintings by French master Eugène Delacroix and then of American painters who took up Orientalist subject matter in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Artists like Frederick Arthur Bridgman, Albert Pinkham Ryder, and Frederick Remington, who went to North Africa in 1892. And some people say that even though the U.S. had no colonialist presence in the Mideast, that the subject reverberated with iconic American subject matter, the heroic man on a horse against a backdrop of the wilderness. So the Sheik would be familiar as well as strange. Now I'm going to shut up while you watch the most famous scene from the entire film with its most famous line. Valentino was an excellent horseman, and director Melford, mainly a director of action films, supposedly was impressed with the actor's athletic abilities, but no doubt there was a stunt double for that scene. At this point, we need to address the relationship of the film to Hull's novel in more detail. E.M. Hull, the author of The Sheik, started life as Edith Maud Henderson, daughter of an American shipbuilder and his Canadian wife. In 1899, at the tender age of 19, Edith married an Englishman, Percy Hull, and settled into Derbyshire countryside. The Sheik was Hull's first novel, written as something to do while her husband is away in World War I. Not very much is known about her life, but she had traveled to Algeria as a child and returned later. Hull's was not the first desert romance or Oriental captivity novel. It was in a long line of tales, both fictional and drawn from historical fact, that reverberated in European culture as cautionary tales, building on the fear of the proximity that Islamic culture and military might had to Christian Europe. Captivity narratives also reminded readers that European white women were vulnerable targets of the lustful instincts of Oriental men. In the 18th century, some captivity novels set in the Middle East were written by British women writers, like Penelope Aubin, author of The Noble Slaves and The Life and Amorous Adventures of Lucinda, the latter written in 1722. She and Eliza Hayward wrote about women who fell into the hands of Oriental despots and extracted themselves from harems through escape or noble death. In these books, Christian morality and monogamy, as well as British rationality and sexual restraint, were contrasted with Oriental brutality, polygamy, and predatory sexuality. Hull's book became the most successful female-authored Oriental captivity novel in publishing history. First appearing in 1919 in Britain, it quickly went into dozens of reprints there. In 1921, it was published in the United States, where it spent 2 years on the top bestseller list, reaching number 6 in the first year and then vaulting to second place in 1922. Over 1 million copies were sold, and the book stayed in print for years. Male critics on both sides of the pond blasted Hull's novel, calling it trashy, silly, bad. It was certainly more sexual bracing and more sensuous than most of its predecessors in women's fiction, including Eleanor Glyn's notorious 3 Weeks of 1907. Glyn's novel had been infamous for depicting a sexual coupling on a bearskin rug, but her work was tame compared to Hull's willingness to explore sensuality of bodies as well as of setting, and her replacement of Glyn's rather glib analysis of upper-class sexual experimentation with an emphasis on the heroine's extreme, turbulent emotions brought on by a shocking and violent change in her circumstances and ultimately in her whole outlook. Let me read to you a little section that is describing this first encounter of Diana and the Sheik that takes place in his tent. Diana's eyes passed over him slowly until they rested on his brown, clean-shaven face, surmounted by crisp, close-cut brown hair. It was the handsomest and the cruelest face that she had ever seen. Her gaze was drawn instinctively to his. He was looking at her with fierce, burning eyes that swept her until she felt that the boyish clothes that covered her slender limbs were stripped from her, leaving her beautiful white body bare under his passionate stare. She shrank back, quivering, dragging the lapel of her riding jacket together over her breast with clutching hands, obeying an impulse that she hardly understood. "Who are you?" she gasped hoarsely. "I am the Sheik Ahmed ben Hassan." One critic called Hull's novel, quote, "poisonously salacious in conception," end quote. And we can see the most obvious reason for that conclusion. The book was about a woman who awakens into sexual bliss and then to love in response to the situation in which she is raped and raped again by a handsome but merciless Oriental man. In this respect, Hull's novel bore a marked resemblance to a pornographic English novel published in 1828 called The Lustful Turk, in which two young English women are kidnapped while traveling. They are whisked away to Algerian harems to be concubines. In the harem of the Dey of Algiers, one of these women, Emily Barlow, is ultimately reconciled to her captor's, quote, erotic despotism, quote, because the Dey educates her into, and now I'm quoting from the novel, desires to which she has hitherto been a stranger, desires that leave a thrill in her vein, end quote. The other woman, Sylvia Carey, is even more resistant, but ultimately calls her rapist, who has to exert Herculean physical effort to conquer her, quote, "the dear wicked Dey," end quote. While this pornographic novel has a sense of humor, unlike Hull's novel, both of these books seem to share the attitude that it is through being raped by the right man that the Western white virgin might be educated into, quote, "the mysteries of love," end quote. Like The Lustful Turk, Hull's novel exploits a domination fantasy, but unlike The Lustful Turk, it was an erotic novel aimed at women who, it was said, not only bought the book, read it, hid it, and loaned it, but who were very eager to see it on the screen. The advertisements of famous players Lasky exploited the film's connection to this controversial bestseller, declaring, quote, "the whole world has been talking about the book, now the whole world is raving about the picture," end quote. Given its notoriety, Hull's book presented problems in being translated to the screen. More than we might imagine, because in 1921, film was not covered by First Amendment rights, and it would not be until the early 50s. Films could be censored, cut, or banned outright. And though there was no national or federal censorship, there were some state censorship boards and a number of local ones as well. Then there was the importance of public opinion and a studio's reputation. There was no rating system, and any film could be seen by anyone, that is, including children. The motion picture industry still was polishing its reputation in offering respectable, high-quality, middle-class entertainment. Famous players Lasky advertised its Paramount pictures as family-friendly fare in women's magazines like the Ladies' Home Journal. Director Melford reassured the New York Telegraph, quote, "We have handled the frank scenes in the Sheik so delicately that I think the censors will be the only disappointed viewers," end quote. Wids, an industry trade magazine, said that the film's makers had rearranged and tamed the story, quote, "to spare the scissors of the censor board," end quote. Valentino's acting in these scenes is strained, and he disliked his performance in the film, as did some reviewers. Contrary to the book, in which the Sheik's motivation is obsessionary revenge against the English, the motivation for the Sheik's behavior in the film is obscured. The only explanation we have for the kidnapping is the unbridled lust of an Arab, his debased racial and cultural heritage. As Ahmed tells his friend Raoul de Saint-Hubert, ironically as if he's repeating this stereotype, quote, "When an Arab sees a woman he wants, he takes her," end quote. Instead of the book's trading in details of the sensuous physical intimacy between the Sheik and Lady Diana, we will have the vibrating walls of the tent, a victimized heroine wearing her cross as a talisman, and coitus interruptus. Rape prevented first by a sandstorm and then again by the Sheik's sudden feelings of compassion for his captive. The elimination of the Sheik's raping of Lady Diana and the elimination of her sexual awakening also served to undermine her motivation for falling in love with her captor. Why exactly does she? Except that he's played by Rudolph Valentino. Gaston is played by Lucien Littlefield, who was Valentino's same age, but who specialized in playing older. In fact, he plays Mary Pickford's father in a 1927 film, My Best Girl, even though he was actually 3 years younger than Mary Pickford. And here's your flashback. The blue tinting immediately tells us that this is a night scene. Certainly, there were male film stars before Valentino who were favorites of women and appeared not only in film, but were featured in fan photos and fan magazines, the latter offering inside scoop of stars' lives, or at least their attitudes. These magazines were aimed at women and girls, and these actors, like Francis X. Bushman and Maurice Costello and Wally Reed, were sometimes associated with romance, but their on-screen lovemaking was generally tame and gentlemanly, reserved. There had been no one like Valentino in terms of his ethnic difference, the overt sensuality and mysterious quality of his sexuality, and no one so seemingly in control of his body movement in a way that appeared to be so attuned to attracting women. Here was a star who was for women, He was no he-man, no action star in the conventional term of it, a former dancer, maybe even a former gigolo, and not even really white. Studios exploited Valentino's foreignness, and famous players Lasky reveled in the controversy about his popularity and his transgressive aspects. Male viewers, at least in the United States, were thought to reject him. This was exemplified in an article in Photoplay of 1922 called A Song of Hate by Dick Dorgan. Let me read a little bit of it to you. "I hate Valentino! Exclamation mark. All men hate Valentino. I hate his oriental optics. I hate his classic nose. I hate his Roman face. I hate his smile. I hate his glistening teeth. I hate his patent leather hair. I hate his Svengali glare. I hate him because he dances too well. I hate him because he's a slicker. I hate him because he's the greatest lover of the screen. The women are all dizzy over him. The men have formed a secret order to loathe, hate, and despise him for obvious reasons. What? Me jealous? Oh no, I just hate him." Valentino was an exotic model of masculinity, mediated through the iconography and perceived moral disorder of the East, the Orient. He reversed acceptable male fascination with the taboo darker woman and became the linchpin in a cultural fantasy in which women desired and enjoyed the sexual objectification of a man who could be androgynous, bejeweled, decorative, and decadent, in other words, orientalized. But we shouldn't forget that in these years, Hollywood made a number of feature films set in the Near East, often set in the distant past. Among them the feature films Cleopatra, Salome, The Queen of Sheba, and The Thief of Baghdad. And other films offered Oriental sequences like D.W. Griffith's Intolerance and Male and Female, a famous Players Lasky film released 2 years before The Sheik. Male and Female was a Cecil B. DeMille directed hit that had an aristocratic, guess what, English heroine, played by Gloria Swanson, daydreaming that she is a Christian slave who is sent to the lion's den after she refuses to become the concubine of, guess what, a handsome but despotic Babylonian king, played by Thomas Meighan. The enigmatic qualities of the Sheik in this film are brought to the surface in scenes like this, in which it appears as if he's romantic, but he refuses to admit that. And now we're going to have another misunderstanding between them over the arrival of his best friend, the author and doctor Raoul de Saint-Hubert. The Sheik is overcome with lust. Or is it love? What is Lady Diana overcome by? Even though Valentino gets passionate, Diana's rejection of him is without any consequences. Of course, this never happens in the book, since submission to masterful masculinity is the primary lesson that Diana must learn in captivity. Where this location shooting actually took place is disputed, with some saying that it was shot near the Yuma Desert, but Emily Leiter says in her well-researched biography of Valentino, claims that these location desert scenes were shot at the Guadalupe sand dunes in Santa Barbara County and also in Oxnard, but obviously sand is pretty much sand. Now we have the arrival of the Sheik's best friend, played by Adolphe Menjou. Menjou was a very versatile actor who appeared in a number of important films in the silent era, including Charles Chaplin's A Woman of Paris and Ernst Lubitsch's The Marriage Circle. Debonair in manner and with a knack for underplaying, Menjou successfully made the transition to sound as he had a distinctive voice. But as he entered middle age, he soon settled into major supporting roles, albeit in important films, like Marlene Dietrich's first American production, Morocco, as Major Rinaldi in A Farewell to Arms with Gary Cooper in 1932, and in the first version of A Star is Born with Janet Gaynor. In 1931, he earned his only Academy Award nomination for his portrayal of the amusingly unprincipled newspaper editor Walter Burns in the film version of The Front Page. Always politically conservative, Menjou became a very vocal anti-communist in the late 40s and early 50s and was prominent in the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. One of his most important films was Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory. Of course, this scene with Diana attempting an escape in the middle of the desert with no supplies, no map, no water, no nothing, is awfully dopey. But it's in the book too, and it's rather necessary in establishing the imminent danger of Omer and his presence nearby. Omer is played by Walter Long, who also had a long career in Hollywood and was most famous for playing Gus, the black man in D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, who stalks a young white woman and then she commits suicide and the KKK takes care of him. He also had numerous roles in sound film, and one of the most interesting, I think, is his essaying the kind of unexpected role of Miles Archer in the first version of The Maltese Falcon from 1931. And he plays opposite Ricardo Cortez as Sam Spade. Cortez was actually, early in his career, a Valentino imitator, and he had been renamed. His original name was Jacob Krantz, and he was from New York City, and his father was a kosher butcher. but he was depicted in film as being another Latin lover. And he had some good roles in the silent period, particularly one in The Torrent, in which Greta Garbo was his leading lady. I do think Lucien Littlefield kind of overplays Gaston. In this dinner for three, Diana's elegant attire reinstates outwardly her white Western femininity through her elaborate and somewhat daring evening dress. Being able to wear her own clothes restores to Diana a sense of her identity, her class and racial status as a civilized white woman. But her Western superiority and independence are then undermined by having to ask permission of the Sheik to retire for the night. This submission to the Sheik's authority reflects her complete loss of control and her dependence on a master who governs her every move. Now, what follows, I think, is a very interesting scene for its ambiguity, in which Raoul emphasizes that the Sheik has unnecessarily humiliated Diana as his unwilling captive and sex slave. But the Sheik's attitude is, what's the problem? And Valentino's performance actually sort of makes it fun, a kind of guilty fun, to see how much sexual authority the actor can assert while he's sitting on the floor even. The Sheik is surely implying in this scene, when he says that Diana is contented, that Diana is sexually contented, which of course depends on our understanding that the film is like the book, that she's been raped. In the book, Raoul counters, she's not content, she's cowed. I can't imitate a French accent, so it's as good as it gets. So, the film is cultivating ambiguity around the question of whether the Sheik and Lady Diana are having sex. And that ambiguity is also built on in the next scene, the one between Raoul and Diana, and a scene that I think would probably please viewers who read Hull's book, if they wanted the film to give them something to hang on to in terms of their own preferred or at least established understanding of the story. That is, the book's daring, taboo thrill that has led them to be interested in seeing the film in the first place. I should mention here that some have attributed Valentino's costumes in The Sheik to Natasha Rambova, rather than to Claire West, head of costuming at famous players Lasky at the time. I don't think they have Rambova's sort of avant-garde touches, but I could be wrong. Rambova's original name was Winifred Shaughnessy, and she was born in Utah. She'd been raised and privileged. She was the stepdaughter of cosmetics millionaire Richard Hudnut, and she became a protege of dancer Theodore Kozlov, who worked in several films with Cecil B. DeMille. Then Rambova became a close confidant and perhaps lover, it was rumored, of Alla Nazimova, a big star at Metro Pictures, who hired her as the costume and set designer for Nazimova's modern dress version of Alexander Dumas' Camille. This was in 1921, and it was on this production that Rambova met Valentino, who was cast to play Marguerite's young lover, Armand. Patsy Ruth Miller also acted in that film, and later she had no kind words for Rambova, whom she thought artistically pretentious and condescending. Miller remarked in an interview in her later years, quote, "Why Rudy fell for her, I could never figure out. But then so did Madame, that is Nazimova. Perhaps she was an artist after all, a con artist," end quote. Now, what I find interesting in this scene is this very melodramatic treatment of Diana's disappointment with men. The level of acting once again suggests, like Valentino's comment about her contentment, that maybe she has been raped. And this is straight out of the book. Playing it both ways, cultivating ambiguity around censorable actions, was something that Hollywood would become very adept at, especially after the creation of the production code in 1930 that detailed how films should treat moral issues and issues of some cultural sensitivity, like the treatment of foreigners and foreign governments. And this was all to keep at bay existing state and local censor boards, actually like the Kansas City board that banned the Sheik. The film industry was also concerned about the prospect of federal censorship. After 1934 and the establishment of a production code administration, industry self-regulation became even more systematized, and ambiguity was discouraged, even visual ambiguity. Agnes Ayres' career was basically over by the end of the silent era once she lost the romantic interest of Jesse Lasky, who, as I mentioned earlier, was vice president of Famous Players Lasky. And she lost her money in the crash of '29, and she'd gained weight. In fact, in the sequel to The Sheik, in Son of the Sheik, she plays Lady Diana Mayo again, 25 years later, and she's overweight and she looks much older than her years. Ayres died young, in the late 30s, I think barely 40 years old, of a cerebral hemorrhage. The scene is actually in the book. It follows the book so closely. It's kind of amazing, except for all the scenes of sexual intimacy. I know, it's kind of a laughable scene. It's in the book. What do you want? The idea that he has to trust her instead of she trusting him. Now, why Gaston and Diana are again out and about is beyond reason. But at least now they're with an armed escort. And here we have cross-cutting again, of course, with Valentino arguing with Menjou. This torturing of the spy is in keeping with Orientalism, but it's interesting that Menjou doesn't even bother to protest against that. Here's some more ambiguity. What Valentino says in this scene is straight from the book, but it really doesn't make any sense anymore, the censorship. This kind of trajectory to the narrative with the misunderstanding between the hard hero and the heroine is basically the same formula that will be taken up in Harlequin romances and all sorts of women's fiction in the 20th century. And I can't really say that Hull generated this idea, but boy, she sure made it popular through the book and then, of course, through the film adaptation. And it is one of those formulas that just is a gift that keeps on giving. Now, we're laughing again. This is extremely hokey, but wait, it's going to get hokier. Now, this is actually a scene that does serve to establish one thing, the loneliness, that he is not polygamous, that he will not have a harem or even another woman, that he's in love with one woman, a Christian woman, and that this is essential for Ahmed to be a prospective husband to Lady Diana in Western cultural terms. In other words, he will not turn to other women, he will not have other women, he will be lonely again. We cut back to Lady Diana and Gaston in a losing battle. And this is present in the book as well, and would be familiar to audiences of Westerns, since it's a typical trope of Westerns where the white woman takes a bullet in order to be saved from the clutches of the Native American. I actually like how this scene is set up for the camera. And we have a little bit of analytical editing here, right here, and here. I know. It's extreme. He doesn't care if she faints when she sees him or not. He's taking her anyway. And Valentino is going back into the desert for unknown reasons, except to further the plot. In the book, she's been missing overnight, and he and Raoul go out to try to find her and Gaston and the attendants. This is probably Melford's most famous film as a director, though he does have some acclaim for directing the Spanish language version of Dracula for Universal in the early 30s, 31. Okay, get ready for this. In the book, he just sees Gaston. But no, here, it's still in the sand. This shot of her in Omer's harem would be very reminiscent of Orientalist painting of the 18th and 19th century with the Nubian guard. Blue indicates a night scene, of course, and here the Sheik gathers his men to rescue Diana. Gaston has 9 lives, really. As did Lucien Littlefield. He worked almost up until the year he died in 1960. And he made hundreds of films. Even though we might think we're going to have a big extended action scene, we really don't have much, because I think it's obvious that this film has been interested in something other than action. And some critics complained that there was so little action and that particularly these scenes seemed so truncated to the point of unbelievability. But you know, our belief has been tested earlier in this film. there's something to be said here about the fact that Omer has black servants or slaves, not only this tall Nubian, but we're also going to see several female slaves. Orientalist paintings often emphasize the contrast between black slaves and the white slave, the white mistress. But obviously, this is reserved for Omer. And in the Sheik's tent, we have Gaston, the French valet, and the very graceful and tender Zila. Omer's depiction is a very stereotypical essaying of an Oriental potentate. This indolent, fat, ugly, cruel, lascivious man. Jealous women in the harem was also a trope of Orientalism. With stories and visualizations of women who killed each other, usually by stabbing, or who killed another woman's child, or who used poison. Let me mention Youssef, who's on the left, to Valentino's right, our left, actor George Wagner, whose name is actually misspelled in the first intertitle that gives the name of his character. He also appeared in John Ford's The Iron Horse in 1924 as Buffalo Bill Cody. And he moved from acting into film directing and producing in the 1930s, with a film called Western Trails of 1938 as his first directorial effort. He directed an Orientalist B film centered on the Foreign Legion in Morocco for a Monogram, Drums of the Desert, in 1940. However, it was at Universal that he had his greatest success as a producer-director, assuming both these roles for The Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr., and producing other Universal horror films like Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman from 1943, Phantom of the Opera from the same year, and The Ghost of Frankenstein. He actually directed two films with John Wayne, 1949's The Fighting Kentuckian, made at Republic Pictures, and Operation Pacific, released in 1941 from Warner Brothers. And he very successfully switched to television in the 1950s and died in 1994 at the age of 90. You're probably wondering how he hears her. And why everyone is overacting. Valentino was not that tall. He was only about 5'7" or 5'8", about the same size as Douglas Fairbanks Sr. So, Walter Long should get the best of him, but he doesn't quite. This is all pretty much from the book. Except for the fact that Raoul is with them in the book. I think this is rather well staged, actually. But they got into Omar's stronghold easily, and they're getting out even more easily. All right, he's flat on his back, but we're going to have some big-time revelations in this scene. And some of you may notice that they're going to have trouble with the 180-degree line, that the editing shifts Valentino from facing one way to the other one rather abruptly, but this line is straight from the book. And here's the big revelation. Now, audiences inevitably laugh at the discovery that the Sheik is actually the son of a Spanish aristocrat and an English lord. So this is a reassurance that the Sheik is actually white instead of black. A last-minute avoidance of miscegenation pointed to by some reviewers both of Hull's novel and of the film. Now, Hull wrote several more desert romances, but she never allowed her lovers to cross the color line, which is not really surprising considering the racial attitudes of the early 20th century in both the United Kingdom and in the United States. Now, in the book, Ahmed has acted out a twisted revenge against the English by kidnapping Diana. Nevertheless, as the narrator tells us, that his mastery of her had provoked her love, that her womanly instincts and femininity rose to the surface. Now, some took the popularity of the novel amongst women as an indication that women really did want men to be masterful, that their cries for independence, including sexual independence in the post-war era, were a bunch of hooey. And male commentators suggested that women wanting these caveman techniques of lovemaking were kind of disgusting. They were also appalled sometimes that Valentino, as the hero, was allowed to get away with behavior that was actually villainous. That a man who ruled his followers also decided to rule a woman by primitive means, by force and fear. However, Jan Cohn, in a book called Romance and the Erotics of Property, Mass Market Fiction for Women, has argued that mass market romances for women, like the Sheik, actually allow the woman to win, her victory coming by her turning her rapist into the perfect lover and husband. And now we come to the end of the Sheik. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I also hope you will check out The Son of the Sheik, which is also on Blu-ray from Kino Lorber.